Hey out there, Computer One students, guess what? It's time to talk about parts of a computer. So here is the 13-inch MacBook Air that most of you are using. You can see that we've got some things here. Oh, look at that, it's actually on. There's the screen here. This is called the LCD screen. LCD stands for Liquid Crystal Display because, and I don't recommend doing this, but if you kind of press a little firmly on there, you can see that there's actually a liquid in there that allows the electrons and electricity to go through it and create the picture. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different things. This particular unit, the LCD unit, is considered an output unit because you're actually able to see something from it. The keyboard, because you are using that to input your information, that would be an input device, as well as the mouse and a couple other things, scanner, and so forth. Okay, so this right here would be the LCD screen. This would be your keyboard. I'm going to hold down the power button so that it goes off, because you never want to do this when the computer is actually on. And that appears to be off. Alright, so I've already removed the screws. Oh, I missed one. Just pop that puppy out. Alright. So now, let's see if we can get right into this thing here. Go ahead and zoom in a bit. This is what the inside of your computer looks like. We'll go out just a smidge. And as you can see from this view, we've got a lot going on here. At least we have a lot going on here in this section. This section right here is all battery. It's really hard to imagine, but 1/3 of this unit is the computer and 2/3 of this unit is the battery. So the battery is charged via the charging port over here. The charger comes in and basically charges these 4 panels, and how it works is it starts to charge this unit, then it charges this unit, then it charges this unit, and all this time over here our power cord will register as orange because it's charging. So it goes then to the 4th unit and it charges the 4th unit, and then it comes back and starts recharging all the way across. And that's why it's really important when you see that light go from an orange to a green, that you can actually unplug it, because that will it will keep it from overcharging. If a battery overcharges, a couple of things can happen. Number one, it can explode, but not like boom explode. It will expand and it will make it really hard to use your mouse. But number two, your computer learns how you use the battery. So as you're working along and you look down and you see that the green light's on, it's continuing to charge, and what it does is it basically makes the life of the battery shorter. So you start off with a good 7-hour battery, and before you know it, you're down to 3 hours, then you're down to 2 hours, then you have a glorified laptop that is really just a desktop because you can only keep it plugged in. There are cycles that it will go through, and that's just an important thing to know about the battery. The battery looks just about the same on both sides. You can see here they've got some protective plastic that keeps that away from you. But this is the part that keeps your computer running. Now, the basic aspect of any computer is 3 main parts that are all found on the motherboard. So this motherboard is really hard to see a lot of things on because it's so small, because it's modern. This would be the motherboard from an old iMac, actually an Eniac to be more precise. Notice the green board, that's often the part of it that says this is your motherboard, and your motherboard is going to hold everything that's important to this computer. On the motherboard will always be the CPU. CPU stands for Central Processing Unit. This is the brains of your computer. This is the thing that runs everything inside your computer and allows it to work. The CPU, Central Processing Unit. Also found on their motherboard would be your RAM, or your RAM slots in this case. Let's see if I can find another one here. This is a 13-inch MacBook Pro from 2012. Right here you can actually see that there's a RAM chip still inside here. This also would be your logic board attached to the motherboard, still housing everything that you need on this computer. But right here, this is your RAM chip. RAM stands for Random Access Memory. There's two types of memory. There's random access memory and there's ROM, or read-only memory. Random access memory allows you to open more applications at once. It allows you to do a lot of copy-paste. It allows you to do a lot of things internally with the computer. Random access memory can be erased very quickly. ROM, on the other hand, which is also built onto your motherboard, stands for read-only memory. And the best example that I can give you for read-only memory is kind of like a newspaper. You open up a newspaper, you're able to read what's on the newspaper, and you're gaining knowledge from that, but you can't change anything that's on that newspaper. RAM you can change, ROM you can't. Okay, so motherboard holds the CPU, the RAM, and the ROM. There is, on this particular computer, well, on some of the older computers, there is a hard drive. This is known as a SATA hard drive, and we know it's a SATA, or actually this is a serial one because of the ports that are there. That grew into a SATA hard drive, which I thought I had one here. SATA gets a little bit smaller and the connections are a little different. You can see that's a little different from a serial connector. Serial connector is a bunch of pins, whereas that one's more of a slide in. And then the newest type of hard drive that we have today is a solid state drive. And that's this guy right here, if I could find the right tool. Pop it off real quick. There we go. So this is your solid state hard drive. And so you can see where we've come. This would be the SATA drive, which is a serial, this is a serial drive. Graduating to the SATA drive. It has those little slide-ins on it. And then gets to this, which is your solid state memory. Notice how thin it is, what it looks like, and you can see right here, this is just like the kind of memory that is in your phone or in a digital camera or anything like that. Now the great thing about the hard drives, where we go from the solid state, we come back to the SATA drive, and go even farther back to these. This type of hard drive was, it's stored on a silicon chip here, a hard drive. This one actually is broken. You can see it doesn't spin. This right here is kind of like an old record player, and it would actually go find the data that's on there. There we go, pulled it off. And then there's a magnet down here that actually works with the computer. And that's why some people say don't put a magnet near a computer. Well, the new solid state drives don't have this issue. But this would be the magnet that's associated with this particular SATA drive. You can see what I like to do when I'm in person for something like this is I always give this to one of the freshmen and say, okay, go ahead and put this back on. You can see it's a fairly sturdy magnet. Pops right into place there. And that is what actually made this hard drive work, is that magnet and this. And so often people would say if you put a magnet against a hard drive, it will offset the magnetic pole of this particular magnet and then cause all your data to go away. With that solid state, we don't have to worry about that anymore. All right, so also on the motherboard, like I said, is the CPU, and the CPU solid state memory is the CPU, which is the central processing unit, has to stay cool. And this is how that central processing unit stays cool. This guy here is actually a heat sink. And this is where the CPU would be glued to. You can kind of see some residue that's left over there. And there's a copper wire that goes to this fan. The fan kicks on and it cools this down, and it cools down the CPU. When your laptop gets warm, it's because the CPU is overheating. Your fan will often kick on, and its whole process is trying to keep that CPU cool. And so there's a lot of different ways that people have tried to cool it down. Here's a monster heat sink, but you can still see it's still copper in here. And this, the fan would suck in air, it would cool it down, and then it would transfer onto that CPU. When you have the computer on your lap, and basically what's happening is you're covering up, let's see if I can open this. There's an opening right here, a gap, where that air is being sucked in. Here's the fan for this one. The CPU would be found right under this guy right here, which is the heat sink going on top of the CPU. The air gets sucked in on the hinge, and if you have it on your lap or on a bed or on a pillow or something like that, that intake for the air can be covered, and that's when it starts getting overheated because it's not able to get that cold air in. So even though they call these things laptops, it's really best to use it on a solid surface where there can be air coming in. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about history, in the sense where we have transferred memory for years. Your hard drive right now is 128 gigabytes, but it didn't always used to be 128 gigabytes. It used to be a lot smaller. Started off right here with a floppy disk. Well, it probably even started before this, but this is a floppy disk. This is often, for you younger folks, I suppose you could say that this looks like the save icon. Well, back in the dark ages when we started using computers, this is how we saved everything. This particular disk right here, floppy disk, you can see right there the little plastic inside there, that is where your data was stored. This right here would store roughly 1.4 megabytes of data. 1.4 megabytes. And it would use a drive like this, where we would stick this in, and you can hear this. It's not going to make any, oh, maybe I got it upside down. There we go. Okay, here we go. So it actually goes into the slot, and then I've got a cheat sheet here. I can just hit this button, and it ejects. But this right here is an actual disk drive. It looks just like this on the inside. And you can see when it goes into the slot, this little mechanism is going to clamp down on the actual diskette inside. So that goes in, you can see right there. And now I'm able to open my files, save my files. 1.4 megabytes, we thought we were just on top of the world. But things had to change. And in changing, we went to this magical thing. Oh, there it is. Looked like this. Well, not this particular one, but let's pretend this is a CD. This CD was able to hold up to 170 megabytes. So think about when you go from this at 1.4 megabytes and we go to a CD, that's going to give us 170 megabytes. 170 floppy disks could fit on this little tiny thing. We were floored. Ask your parents, they might remember VHSs. You could get a 60-minute or 120-minute VHS tape. It was a big videotape. This DVD replaced that, and it was able to hold 4.3 gigabytes of data. 4.3 gigabytes. So if we started off with this at 1.4 megabytes, tiny, 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 we go to this at 170 megabytes, which is much bigger, and then we get the DVD, that's 4.3 gigabytes of data. So suddenly we go from this tiny little, or this thing here giving us this tiny little thing, and we can put nearly 4,000 of these on this disk. We thought we were just flying. And since then, we have gone, well, like I said, this is a 128 gigabyte hard drive on this computer. The hard drives work with binary code. It's you start off with 1, then it goes to 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. So if this is 128 gigabyte, the next one up that you can get is a 256 gigabyte. The one up from there is a 512 gigabyte, and then the one up from there is 1 terabyte, which would be doubling every time. So you can see how that works. Let's see, what else can we talk about? It's not as common anymore, but ways to get connected to the internet. We started off with this massive plug right here, which actually is an Ethernet plug. You could also plug in your phone port, and you'd plug that into a modem. And a modem stands for modulate demodulate, and basically that allowed your computer to handshake with the internet. Moving up from there, we went to a wireless card. It looks a lot like this. This is actually an Airport Extreme card. We thought we were really flying with this particular unit. It just plugged in. There's an antenna that is still used today. The new wireless card on this unit is this guy right here. You can see these two things that are attached to it. The wires go into the hinge, and then they actually go up the side of the LCD. Why is that, you might ask? Because when you open up your laptop, what's the highest point on the computer? So your Wi-Fi antenna is actually up at the top so that you're able to get a better signal. Alright, so let's see. Video card. A video card is what allows you to view video on the screen or pictures. Now we started off back early days of computing, probably the 1980s, we had a text interface. So you would open up your screen and you would just see a prompt. It would be similar to if you have a PC and you type in the search window CMD, it opens up a command prompt. Or if you're on a Mac and you open up the terminal, you can see that there's just text. This is how we were able to actually view computers. And so you would have to know certain codes to type in and be able to, you know, be kind of a, it's where the, you know, programming language first kind of started. So you'd type in catalog or log, and it would actually bring up that information. From that point, we went to what's called a Gui Interface, and so that's GUI, Gui Interface, and that stands for Graphic Unit Interface, and that's what we see now. If I was to turn this computer back on, the GUI interface takes all the code that somebody typed in on the keyboard and it puts it into a picture that shows up here on the screen. I'll put the case back on here real quick so that we don't get anything in the fan or anything. And so that GUI interface now looks like this. We're with a startup screen. It's going through the processes. It's opening up different programs, and suddenly it says login time. Yep, here's the login time. Here's where we are. The picture is all because of that GUI interface. Otherwise, you would just see text. Okay, we talked about the hard drives, the different types. We talked about CPU, Central Processing Unit, also known as the brains of the computer. We talked about RAM and we talked about ROM. RAM, remember, is your random access memory. Your ROM is your read-only memory. We talked about the motherboard. Remember, the motherboard is what holds everything on the computer, all the important parts of the computer, I should say, right here. We talked about CD-ROMs a little bit. We talked about the CD itself. We didn't talk about the ROM drive, which reads your data with a laser, which is kind of cool. We talked about floppy drives back in the history. ROM, we talked about that. Sound card, we didn't really talk too much about the sound card. One of the things about a laptop is that the speakers on a laptop are really fairly small on most of them. You can spend a little bit of money and get a laptop with a good sound system, but to the most part, you know, your speaker's only going to be about this big. So when you have a desktop machine, your speakers can be a lot bigger because you can put in more bigger and badder speakers right there. Same thing with a laptop. You can spend a little money and plug one in, but then it's not as portable as your laptop should be. We talked about the modem. Oh, BIOS. We didn't talk about BIOS per se. BIOS is a system that is basically anything that you put into the computer or take out of the computer or get from the computer is your BIOS system. BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System, so BIOS, Basic Input Output System. So as an example, your input is your keyboard, your scanner, your output would be your monitor or a printer, or your screen. Well, that would be that too. Okay, and last but not least, a bug, a computer bug. We've always heard about a computer bug. There's so many processes that are going on in your computer all without you even knowing. Right now there are multiple things happening while you're watching this video. Computer parts telling different computer parts to do different things, all at the same time. And occasionally those collide. And when they collide, you get a little bug. It could be an issue in the programming language itself for the program. It could be just could be anything, really. It's a bug. It's a mistake. It's a oops. Back when we had one of the first computers called an Eniac. This was the Eniac, you really should Google it. It's a pretty cool thing. It was a 3-story building on a university campus. The first floor was all air conditioning units, which is kind of like the fan right here. The second floor was all tubes and different sorts of electrical devices that were putting it all together. And then the third floor was a place where you could insert a card system. And you'd put in these cards and it would go through, and this computer, all it did was solve math problems. And so this Eniac was just a magical box that you could put in a math problem on one side, and on the other side out comes your answers for these math problems. Well, one day the computer stopped working, and one of the people who operated the computer started looking through the second floor where all these little light bulbs were that fuses and so forth. And what he found was a little moth inside that had landed on one of the little diodes or little light tubes that were there. Landed on top of it, and it fried the whole thing. And thus that became the first computer bug.